Hey, hello. So today I'm going to be taking a look at what decks are likely to see more play usage if we are to assume that the restriction list that they announced for the Japanese game applies over here in English. Now, there may be some variation and it may invalidate a few of the decks that I've placed in this. But for now, we'll just go by that knowledge until we see the English list. If it's similar, then this is not null and void. But if there's variation, then maybe expect like a few decks to change their positions on this list. But if you see anything go on peak or high, those are decks that I would recommend looking out for. Whereas some Little and Dead, you can just ignore that in your playtesting to help you for the rest of the season in the upcoming events. So, to begin with, we'll go with Kagero. Kagero is more likely going to be Overlord. I don't think anyone touches Blade Master anymore. So, Overlord will see some representation. I think I've been hearing whispers here and there about Eugene, and obviously we don't have the restrictions for the, I think it was Nazar or something, the Dragon Knight card. That restriction hasn't been applied here in English, so it's very possible even that version sees some representation. But for now, I'll put it under the some category. Obviously in Japan, they've got the grade 3 triggers, which is part of the reason why that deck saw more play there. Next, we have Granblue. This will be the Beatrice with Night Rose and Skull Dragon variant, because that's all we've ever seen in recent years. It's been Skull Dragon plus any Protect gift marker for years until, obviously, the hand trap combo with Beatrice and Night Rose is sort of the extra kind of push card to punish people at Greatstorm. Or to use with Bad Bounty as well. So, this is peak because Granblue has been one of those decks where people have perceived as like maybe the strongest, or one of the strongest. But obviously there's always like some sort of boogeyman, at least one boogeyman or two boogeymen who Granblue players fear in the format and have a hard time playtesting around. That's been kind of happening repeatedly. We've had the Sinister Six, which I think is more a case of like Granblue was just seen as an alternative to counter those decks. But obviously, them being hit and removed from the equation obviously made life a lot easier. But then after that, we went to Stoicheia, where they released the Ruination Dragon card, which lets you activate all the cards from your drop zone for free if you place it on Vanguard. That card got limited, but before it got limited, the deck was seeing quite a bit of usage, and it was something that Granblue players feared, alongside Nightmare Dolls, which got a slight slap in the wrist, as well with a small restriction. Choice restrict, actually, because for some reason, Pale Moon restrictions like to jump through hoops to keep nothing from being limited or banned for some reason. So, once those two decks kind of settle down a bit more, then obviously it should have made life a bit better again for Granblue players, but then came Ripples the Mystery Flare Dragon, which also made life hell, especially after they just got Bartholomew as well, and a new G-Guard that can be used as your first G-Guardian that can disrupt the opponent by minusing the crits. So it's been kind of a weird one. They've had to sail through quite some rough seas with some of the cards that get printed, because there's always a new deck that appears that Granblue players are like, oh shoot, not this again. So with the restrictions, maybe we'll just see Granblue come into peak again, but who knows, maybe there'll be a new deck that appears that won't make things easy anymore. That could happen again. The thing is that right now we're not getting any V or P products for the rest of the year so far. So that could mean that we're not going to see something like another Genovis again, or another Schlishma. So the only kind of support to expect is Overdress support, which is obviously nation cards. And with nations, it's a bit of a wild factor. Obviously, it's main deck stuff, and it's probably not going to be that strong at face value. But we've had a few freak cards come out before here and there, especially in the Stoicheia side of things. So there's always a chance something disrupts from there. But the fact that we had Genovius, which should have been like one of the most foreseeable things ever in card design, and yet they banned Odysseus instead of just designing Genovis to take into account Odysseus. It kind of just shows you that, to some extent, when it comes to P and V clan collections, even if they have to work with just a few cards, that they're still just like going to be clumsy and just throw something like that out there that leads to an obvious restriction. I'd say like Genovis is like one of the worst design cards I think since Zazen. So it's pretty bad when you have like only 3 cards and you end up already banning the famous card that they should have known about in the design stage over it. So I'd say Granblue at peak. This could change just due to their bad luck. Next, I would put Aqua under the high category. So this could be either Thavas, because obviously Thavas ride down. That's been seeing quite a bit of play until Ripples obviously took its But Aqua, yeah, it's been creeping a bit more recently in terms of usage. And we've been seeing in Springfest as well, Thavas appearing in some higher tables as well. So that's obviously a good thing, because it's a counter against Nightmare Dolls as well, which is one of the most popular decks right now. But the other thing is that while Ripples lost Odysseus, Ripples had a lot going for it. Like, it was a really, really strong deck because it had loads of things that helped it. And just like with Gurgwet Percival in V Premium, if you limit Percival to 1, you just take advantage of the freed up grade 3 slots and you play other stuff like Max/Dragon, for example, or Sagramore. The same thing kind of applies with Ripples, where, okay, now that Odysseus is banned, you can now play into, for example, the damage adders and activate the limit break of Genovus, because Genovus was really strong for various reasons. So if I was to make an analogy about Genovius with Regalia, for example, because I've seen like two things I can compare here. When Angelica was first revealed, the Regalia Grade 3, one of the main bosses, people said the card was good just because it had the Force marker print on it and it had the Regalia name. That's all you needed for it to be a good choice to play in a deck. The effect, it could have been the vanilla and people would have still played it. Obviously because of CO Yggdrasil and because of Regalia Fate Norn, because the name and then carrying over to a Stride is really good. But then Ripples, obviously an Axel Circle card printed on a Ripple Grade 3 would have been good with with Odysseus. So you could do rerides while getting Axel 2 and draw cards. And then you have more rearguards to call. And then you can do more combos. However, what made Genovius really strong was also the fact that the skills were actually really good. So, in fact, one of the skills is similar to another Regalia Grade 3, which is called Frag. Frag is a counterblast 1 to check top 5 and you call a unit, any unit. If it's Regalia, you get a bonus equip gauge, but that's not important. Genovius basically does the same thing. Check top 5 to call any unit. However, it wasn't counterblast 1, it was Soul Blast 1. So it means that it doesn't get outplayed by damage denial, even if you could spam it multiple times through re-rising with Odysseus. So that obviously elevated it, and by checking top 5, you're able to kind of go through your deck and find more combo pieces, either to give yourself damage to go to Limit Break, or to call more Odysseus, or to call more Pursuit Assaults, call more Coral Assaults, Narissas, any engine card really, even Thavas to pop your opponent's rearguards. You could find all kinds of cards with that check top 5. It just kept the momentum going, which is sort of what added to Ripple's consistency as a deck. Without that skill, I don't think Ripples would have been anywhere near as good. But then, to make it even more dangerous, they had a skill where on attack, you can basically counterblast 1 to restand a rearguard. If you're on Limit Break, then you can restand all your front row units. So, and of course there's the Pavroth thing. If you have Pavroth and Soul, they gain 5k as well. But that wasn't used as much in this variant, which is also another thing, because with the restriction, you can actually maybe take a look into considering more Pavroth actually for this list, because Odysseus was a searcher for Genovius, so maybe Ripple players might start playing more Pavroth, which might mean that adding 5k might become more of a bigger play this time around. But going back, so the Odysseus band, you basically just create room to now play other things. So you could play into Pavroth now as your main strategy. You could maybe play into damage adders as your main strategy. It just opens up new opportunities on other ways to exploit Genovius' strength, because Genovius on his own was actually a really strong card without Odysseus. So because of that reason, I would keep it under the high category. I think people will catch on and realize that you can still play Ripple very well without Odysseus. Next, Great Nature. I'd say it's under the little section. The reason why is because nothing really changes. Like, it wasn't being played that much in the first place, so why would it change now? Then Shadow Paladin, I would say high representation, because Luard is a very popular deck and it still sees play after many years. There's always new engine cards that come out, but nothing has really happened to kind of change the reason for Luard not to be played. So there's less threats now, and I think that'll help it. But it's not even just Luard. Raging Form is also a popular choice. Not as popular as Luard, I don't think, but you can high roll with Raging Form, and then you can basically press your opponent's hand if you don't win that turn, and build a lot of hand on your own end, which then leads to being able to sort of like topple them over on your turn 4 play. So Raging is also a possible one. We have seen some Raging tops in both V and a bit in Premium as well. So I wouldn't count that one out either. I would definitely say keep an eye out on Shadows. It's also quite dangerous when you go against Luard because of the G Guardians, because Luard V-Series can gain force markers, especially if they high roll against you or if they decide to ride up first. And then they punish you the next turn, because no matter what kind of hand you get with G Guardians, they'll still battle duel you out, because if the G Guards don't build as big a number, unless you play Perfect Guard G Guards, if you happen to be one of those clans, unless you have those, then they're going to get around you, and they are going to make it so that you have to drop not just a G Guard, but then 2 additional cards as well on top of that. So obviously G Guards don't count as part of the battle skill, so you might even just have the vanilla guard with the heal trigger. Next, Oracle Think Tank. So Oracle Think Tank, I would say any variant can appear. It could be Witches, it could be Magus, it could be Susanoo, it could be Balsas, or it could be Tsukiyomi. But it's not being heavily played, but you do see OT players here and there in events. I would say you probably don't need to test as much of it because it's not seeing enough representation, I think. And to be fair, Oracle Think Tank has been the same thing for years, generally. So when it comes to what you need to look out for, how to play around them, not much has changed. Because of that, I don't think you really need any testing against it. So I wouldn't put any focus on them. Royal Paladin, I would say some. Honestly, I kind of want to borderline put it here. I definitely would say Dual Knights is something to be aware of, but it's mainly the Crystallosis Salome combo to look out for. So other Royal Paladin decks aren't really being used as much as Dual Knights. Dual Knights, it's more a case of you get to turn 4, and by then it's hard to guard against it. It's a pretty strong turn that they have. But if you can take them out before then you should be okay. And to be fair, Dual Knights will try and smack face because they're a lot easier to deal with when they don't have you on as much damage. Next, we have Narukami. This can be either Vanquisher or Eradicators. Because of Demolition plus Stunverse, it's kind of just given people more reasons to complain about it. So this is actually a possible deck that could get added to the English restriction list, because volume of complaints do seem to translate over to restrictions, clearly. And Narukami has definitely been one of those decks where people just feel like it's sort of like shredding them a bit more. People will have to definitely figure out how to play around them more compared to other decks out there. So it's not just the aggression side, but it's the fact that they can hand shred as well with Stunverse. And if you have any cards in your drop zone, they can obviously get rid of that and then gain more power. And Axle Circles obviously help. They also have Virina Esperidia, which has come out fairly recently, which you can also use to restand on your stride turn if you go into Demolition Dragon. Sorry, Demolition Dragon. Exterminate Dragon. It does have the same artist though as Demolition Dragon. It looks the same, and it is drawn by the same guy. The hand traps as well are also a bit of a threat as well, and also there is the thing with the early game. So the early game is actually weak, generally. In fact, I think one of the reasons why Vanquisher can see more play is because Vanquisher doesn't really care as much about the early game. They will just ride up and actually threaten you. Whereas Eradicators, when they ride up, they don't really do much. So that's another thing. They have also an Intercept that can intercept and retire a unit, which is one of their other counterplays. So what they do is they try to kind of hit you down. If they don't win turn 3, they'll probably win turn 4. But while they're doing that, while they're trying to kind of build that win, they try to stop you from being able to push them. So they'll rip your hand, or they will G-Guard and pop your units. And they can actually retire multiple units with Impede Dragon as well. So Impede is a GB1, so they have to stride in the first place, or G-Guard twice to do that. So it's definitely quite a dangerous one. Next we have Dark Regulars. So Dark Regulars I'd say will peak, because Dark Regulars has definitely been getting a bit more attention. And I'm not just talking about the couple Dark Regular players that I test with, but there's there's definitely more talk I've seen of this clan. Forfax, I've been seeing more people wanting Forfax as well, actually, in trades and things. But the thing is with this card is that it's like Haltruda and Momo, but probably more dangerous because of the synergies it can do. In that you're discarding more cards from hand, but you don't care because you're going to win the game anyway, or you're probably going to deck out anyway or something. But Forfax definitely makes that push that wins the game. And I've noticed people playing the D-Series card that can countercharge when it attacks. So that obviously helps to enable counterblast because of NLK. If you use No Life King to get more attacks, big attacks as well with crits. And you're also giving crits to the unit that you call out or ride out even. You have Enigmatic Assassin who can get you more attacks. Then you have Baron Magnus who comes out and then gets you additional rearguard attacks. But then one of the rearguards you call can be Hope on Damp, which then creates one of the most painful guard restricts. And with that, you have your 3 attacks. But then, on top of the 3 Hope on Damp attacks, you then follow up with a Forfax as your ultimate finisher if your opponent has already made it this far. And that massive attack extension combo, while being able to play around damage and now a bit more than before, that will definitely help because before they had to rely on Monochrome Cat, and Monochrome Cat was a Generation Break 1 stand trigger, so you'd have to stride. But Forfax is different to other strides because you would basically attack and then stride. It's like Marduk, so any sort of main phase Generation Break 1 ability would not work. And obviously with Gas Steel being banned, there's no longer an opportunity. Monochrome Cat has kind of been indirectly hit because of the Gas Steel ban. So now with this new strategy, Monochrome Cat isn't being used as the counter charge anymore. But even then, even that being said, Monochrome Cat being a main phase skill obviously doesn't help when you're trying to do battle phase counter charging. So the new Overdress card, the Dark States Grade 2, that obviously helps because it's during battle as well. And you can always get it back off of something like Baron Magnus too, if you do start to run out of Counterblast. So there's a lot of synergy between Dark States cards and also the traditional Dark Regulars that they've got. So I'd say definitely one of the more dangerous decks. It can win turn 3 as well. So that's something to look out for. And that's, I think Forfax, yeah, Forfax requires your opponent being grade 3, by the way. You can't use it if your opponent's on grade 2. Next we have Spike Brothers, which speaking of, also this deck requires your opponent being grade 3 to try and go for a massive kill. Mecha Instructor, that's the main reason, the stand trigger. So that's something you have to look out for. It's quite hard to counterplay against Spikes. There's not as many counters compared to other bosses in the game. So when they pull it off, then that's kind of very deadly. And I think one of the things that gives them strength is that they can rush you early game to deal more damage because they can whack you with like 4 attacks and some high numbers as well. Or make it so that if you do guard, you're risking it more likely on a 1 to pass because you might not have the shields. So if they get you to high damage earlier on and then you ride up and they survive your ride up play, which is by the way easier because of cards like Fiona as well, because Fiona can stop auto abilities of rearguards. So if you have certain rearguards, then that card can sort of nerf them too. But then to add to that, they've got the fact that they've left you on high damage. So by doing that, they stop you from damage checking triggers as much, which then helps them to get you to 6, because obviously damage triggers are supposed to be the weakness, and Galley can give 10k to every unit that attacks while returning them to the deck, which obviously helps to trigger the stand trigger. So I'd say it's in the peak tier. This is definitely one of the more scary decks that came out of P-Clan Collection, but obviously overshadowed by Ripple and Mystery Flare Dragon, because they don't care what grade your opponent's on. Then we have Tachikaze, which I'd say nothing has changed really. There's no real reason why I would expect us to see more play usage, just because those 2 decks got banned. Then Haltroda, I'd say at the top, because I think those 2 decks definitely hurt Bermuda Triangle. Bermuda has a good legacy when it comes to support. There's a lot of different decks you can use, but obviously I think the one-off version, which is called, well, people call it Highlander, that's more likely to see play. Riviera also sees a bit of play. It's seen a few tops as well fairly recently. So I would say definitely be aware of the Bermuda matchup as well. They can high roll you. So any deck that high rolls you, you definitely want to make sure you're prepared for those as well. It's not Haltroda herself because she's a G unit, but it's stuff like Reindeer that can do it, and obviously Pearl Sister, Ange, those sort of combos. So just be aware of that. I would say definitely sees more usage again, because they don't have to be worried about those 2 decks. And those 2 decks that got hit, the thing is that one of the things that made them harder is that they punish you if they high roll for going first, basically. Because if you give them damage, they can either try and do the limit break by using damage adders in ripples, or Misery Flare can just like... Well, that one doesn't matter as much, but it'll just try and kill you regardless what you have done and so on. So ripples, I think, stopped Bermuda players from wanting to sort of... it stopped Bermuda players from wanting to do as much pressure, which obviously doesn't help, because if you can't do as much pressure, then your pressure cards kind of lose value in the game, and then you know for a fact that you're going to be playing the long game. You can try doing a G-Guard Honley combo as well, though, to try and at least counterplay ripples in the long game. That's also possible, but in terms of guard quality, it might be a bit uncomfortable. So you may not necessarily build the hand that you're looking for in the long run. Honestly, it's not really a matchup I've tested myself, but I think that's kind of the rough theory on where the Warriors would have been. So I think with ripples out the way, I think people might pick up Bermuda more again. Angels, I'd say, would see some representation. So before all this, when People Clan Collection was being revealed and they showed the Stride, there was more interest in people picking up Haruts and building no-CL decks with it. So there'll definitely be some people around, but I wouldn't say Angels have become like super heavily played. I would just say people have just been more interested in trying the deck out. So you'll see some representation of it. Gold Paladin's a weird one. I'm thinking between either little or some. It's not really been as popular ever since the One Dazzle ban. Even Gurgwet never really picked up in Premium, which has been very strange considering how popular it is in V, and considering that Premium lets you play 4 copies of Percival. So that's kind of saying something. I think Liberators is very interesting in Premium. I don't think it'll be under the high or peak, but it's an interesting deck to be curious about. But I don't think you have to really practice against or anything. So I could either put this under little or some, but honestly, I'd say Liberators is maybe on my watch list because I'm not sure what to make of it right now. It's only just gotten support recently the other day, and obviously Ripples has kind of overshadowed it. So I've got to kind of see if anything else comes of it. So for now, I just put it under little. Then Murakumo, there's been a little bit of noise, but not quite as much going on in terms of tops lately because of Ripples and MFD, but I'm not sure to what extent this will see a lot of usage or results. There's been talk about Shirayuki. People say, yeah, Murakumo's, there's some aggressive plays you can do with it, but I've not really been seeing it around, so I'm not convinced on putting it under high or peak yet. Genesis, I would say higher because Regalia, just the one Regalia build, that's it. Because obviously the rest of the clan, there's nothing really to be said there. Regalia has been getting a bit of support. So they've got 3 new cards in the clan collection which you can play around with. They don't necessarily creep the deck, it's more like it just gives you options. And obviously if people have options, they want to play around with new cards. So it's sort of like, in a way, it's sort of like Ripples, I guess, because they got new cards as well, so that obviously helps them get more play usage. I've been having a bit of fun again with Regalia because I get to mess around with new stuff, but also the new Stride is actually really good in Regalia. But obviously Minerva's even better in Regalia, so you kind of use the Dragon if you don't have any other options. It's the fact that now you've got more fallback strategies than before. And then the Genesis G-Guard is also just really handy to have in case. So there's definitely some appeal with it, but I think the brickiness of that deck is sort of what turns people off a bit if they're looking to play it competitively. There are things that go wrong. You definitely need to draw into specific cards for the deck to keep up, because Genesis doesn't actually have any sort of G-units that can sort of carry a deck. Their G-units kind of rely quite heavily on rear guards. Like when the Taro got banned, because of how Genesis was designed as a clan, it obviously invalidated some of the G-units. But Sia Yggdrasil and Norn sort of also complement the Strides as well. So it does rely a bit on, you need to draw that CEO, otherwise it's kind of bust. And obviously you slow down the game, and if you slow down the game, then something like Narukami or Granblue could just end up eating you alive. Then next we have Neo Nectar, little play because I've not really seen much of it being used. People sort of saying the same thing with this as Narukami almost, like you can now hit people harder, but it just hasn't gotten that kind of momentum. Pale Moon, I'd say at the top, it's specifically going to be Nightmare Dolls, but I do think there will be some Harry and a bit of Silver Thorns as well. Silver Thorns is actually quite good with Leontina as well, but Nightmare Dolls, it's already established. It's already like a famous Boogeyman deck. When it got restricted last time, people just laughed and said, wow, this did nothing. So by that nature, it becomes an easy choice if you're looking for a deck that you would think is like more reliable. But Pale Moon, yeah, they just jump through hoops to avoid restrictions. It almost seems like, because it's been mainly just choice restricts as well. Then Mega Colony, I'd say high, because Ghidorah. Okay, so while the Stoicheia Grade 3 did get limited, the thing is that card, it wasn't really like the be all end all. There's still other Stoicheia cards that are quite strong. There's cards like Shieldfisher Dragon, which Pete played actually during BRO. You get the 18k base, but you can also do some beta attacks. Ghidorah gets you multi-attacks. There are a couple Mega Colony Grade 3s that can get you more attacks as well. So you can do pressure. You can have a good Grade 2 game now that you can drift away from the engine played around the book and the Ruination, because playing that deck actually had its opportunity costs in that you can actually play other cards. Like, you're usually playing like a really weak Grade 2 game. In fact, that's the reason why people started playing the Giraffe Grade 2, because that card could sustain on its own every turn, keep drawing and drawing. It wasn't like a one-time use on place card. So that was quite important in that version of the deck. But now there's a lot they can do. They can free up space to play other cards that are good in the early game. And so they can force you to ride up, and then they just kill you with Ghidorah. So it's still a threat to practice against or be aware of if you have that luxury. And so it definitely deserves a place. And obviously with the new G unit as well, it helps to give more power, or rather reduce the opponent's power. Next, we have Nova Grappler. I would say little use, because nothing much has changed, so why would it change now? You do still run into Nova players. In fact, Brandgate over Trigger is kind of spicy in Novas. Obviously, that's a bit bad for me to say because no one likes over Triggers, but I think there is probably that kind of lure where you use Busted and then you might get the over trigger because you have a lot of drives. Then Link Joker, I would say maybe some usage, possibly, because, or maybe higher. I'm not really sure. So the thing is that this deck, well, it sort of counters some stuff, I would say. So it's definitely good for that. But it's the deleter with Given. I think that is the main play that people might use in this deck, because you can go for OTK plays on turn 3 with it. So I think they'll have some appeal, and there is a bit of control element as well, which might pull people. Maybe I'm overrating it, maybe I should put under some, but I've been seeing more Link Joker getting picked up, so maybe keep an eye on this. Be aware, because to be fair, if you go against Given and this Stride comes out, you can be caught by surprise, and that could cost you games. So definitely, I would put that on the high for that reason, just to give you the alert. And then Gear Chronicle. Gear Chronicle, I think, might see some play. Maybe high for now. It could go to peak. Steam Maiden, I've heard, is really good, because the reason why they're not getting as much play is because of Mystery Flare Dragon overshadowing it right now. But with Mystery Flare Dragon being banned, people are going to look for another deck. Now, with V, people can see that Steam Maidens are doing things right now. But then again, you can say the same about Prism and Gurgwe. And obviously, Prism and Gurgwe, while they're quite nice in Premium, haven't really been seeing much usage for some reason, which is strange. So just because something's popular in V doesn't mean it's going to be popular in Premium, apparently. But definitely look out for Steam Maidens. So I'll put it under high, because you can't ignore the deck's existence right now. Luckily, they don't have Hetero Round Dragon, because they need Chrome Jet Dragon as their Vanguard. Next, we have Dimension Police. Maybe I'll put this under higher, or maybe I'll put under some. I have been seeing a lot of D Police around in tournaments. There's definitely people playing it more. The thing is I think P-Clan Collection probably demotivated D-Police players a bit in terms of usage, because there are G-Guards that can literally just shut off the deck. Obviously, like Genesis can shut it off more. Shadow Paladin can shut it off more. So maybe I'll put under some. Next we have Nubatama. So Nubatama, definitely I think some representation for that one as well. It's never so heavily played. Nubatama is very good, especially in the hands of a good player. The thing is that it requires a lot of testing compared to other clans, because you need to know your matchups better when playing with Nubatama, and that will always keep it nerfed. But you do see Nubatama players always spiking around, and there's always some people that just shop in an event and then you get into the top 8s easily, because they're just that good with the deck. So you definitely do expect to be around, for sure. So I'd say some, but it's not going to be like as heavy. Honestly, Nubatama I'd probably say borderline high, but you're not always going to see it in every tournament. So I think that's more or less it. So nothing in a dead category, fortunately. It's just a case of, yeah, there are these decks. Some of them will get played more, I think. Others not as much, but moderately. And I would say like the 12 clans, you got to make sure you know. Bartholomew and Granblue, obviously. I think the stride for Bartholomew has definitely elevated the deck more. And obviously the restrictions always help as well. Narukami, because it's the current boogeyman of the format right now. Then you've got Dark Irregulars, because it's got more OTK potential than before, and it's got some engine support too to go with it. Then you've got Spike Brothers, because it can glass cannon your opponent out on turn 3 if they're on grade 3, of course. Then you've got Bermuda, because it's just been very popular as a choice. It's got a bit of that ability to kind of like just adapt as well to the game state a bit more. Then you've got Power Moon. Power Moon, obviously because, well, legacy reasons, it's kind of carried on, just kept calm, carrying on without any sort of much of a change really going on to the clan. And then, so it's sort of like a safe choice, I would say. Like, it's just seen as safe, safe and established. Then on the highest section we have Aqua Force. I think Ripples is not going anywhere. I think they will still remain. That's my prediction anyway. I haven't tested an Odysseus Ripple list, but in theory I think they will still be around. And then Thabos, of course, is there too, which will definitely be more useful against decks like maybe well, any deck that can high roll really. And Nightmare Dolls as well. It's similar to Nightmare Dolls with the whole ride down play. And then after that we have also the Shadow Paladin deck, so any of the 2 Raging Form Luard. Luard especially, because I think that one will see more play. Genesis, Regalia. To be fair, there are definitely ways to counter Regalia that are quite straightforward, so if you know those ways, then you can definitely have a much easier matchup against it. Then there's Mega Colony. That deck will always come back, I think, because you can just find another engine. Link Joker, you have to make sure you know this one, I think, because otherwise you will lose games and you won't even know what hit you. And then Gear Chronicle, because I think this one might see some use with the Steam Maidens. So I think those will be the 12 decks to focus on for this format. Obviously, card releases could change that. That's my current prediction right now. English list, if we get the restriction list for English and it varies in some way, then of course this list could change as well, this prediction of mine. Maybe Narukami might drop. Maybe that paves the way for something else as well to go up that I may not have considered. But let me know what you think. Do you think I'm underrating or overrating some of these? Do you think there's some decks maybe I've missed? Let me know down below. It's just a chance we just kind of pull together some information and share and get people ready for the next set of national tournaments, I guess. So until then, I guess I'll be seeing you guys later, and goodbye.